My daughter invited a gang of women into my home under the guise of spiritual healing, but they stripped my house of its most valuable history while I made them tea in the kitchen. They thought they had pulled off the perfect heist against a senile, lonely old man who was too feeble to stop them. They did not know that I had been expecting this betrayal for nearly a decade, and the surprise I had waiting for them would cost them far more than the price of the gold they stole. Before we get into this story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow and allows us to bring you more stories like this one. Also, leave a comment below. If your estranged child showed up after 3 years asking to come into your home, would you let them in? Let's find out if I made the right choice. My name is Charlie. I am 72 years old, and for the last 4 years, I have lived in a silence so profound that I can hear the settling of the floorboards in the middle of the night. My home is a large 2-story Victorian in a neighborhood that used to be fashionable but has slowly quieted down as the younger families moved to the suburbs. It is a house built for a family of 6, yet it currently houses only me and the ghosts of my past. Since my wife, Eleanor, passed away from ovarian cancer, I have curated this house not as a living space, but as a museum of memory. I do not own a flat-screen television. I do not have a smartphone. My days are spent maintaining the woodwork, polishing the silver, and tending to the legacy my great-grandfather left behind. My great-grandfather was a man named Silas, a merchant who made a fortune running supplies during the Reconstruction era after the Civil War. He was a man of peculiar tastes and intense paranoia. He did not trust banks, and he did not trust paper money. He converted his wealth into tangible assets, gold trade coins, intricate pocket watches commissioned from Swiss masters, and uncut diamonds he brought over from Europe in the heel of his boot. Through a line of careful preservation and the untimely deaths of other relatives, that collection came to me. These items were not merely assets to be sold. They were the physical embodiment of my family's survival. They were the reason we ate during the Depression. They were the reason my father could afford college. They were kept in a wall safe behind a heavy, quarter-sawn oak bookcase in my study. The location was known only to 2 people, myself and my daughter, Sarah. Sarah. Even saying her name brings a complicated mix of affection and bile to the back of my throat. Sarah is 45 years old, though she still acts with the impulsive recklessness of a teenager. She is unmarried, perpetually unemployed, and considers herself a free spirit, which is usually code for someone who refuses to take responsibility for their own life. Sarah has always been a drifter, moving from one get-rich-quick scheme to another, dragging a series of unsavory boyfriends along in her wake. Our relationship shattered 3 years ago. It wasn't a sudden break, but the final snap of a rope that had been fraying for decades. I caught her trying to forge my signature on a check to pay off a gambling debt for a man named Rick. I didn't call the police then. I simply tore up the check, looked her in the eye, and told her that the bank was closed. She screamed at me. She told me I was a selfish old miser who cared more about his dusty junk than his own flesh and blood. She left that night, and the silence she left behind was heavy but peaceful. For 3 years I heard nothing. No birthday cards, no Christmas calls, just the quiet routine of my life. I woke up at 6, drank black coffee, read the newspaper, and polished the history in my study. Then, 2 months ago, the doorbell rang. It was a rainy Tuesday. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the heavy front door, Sarah was standing there. She looked older. The lines around her eyes were deeper, and her hair was dyed a harsh, brassy blonde that clashed with her pale skin. She was holding a foil-covered dish, a lasagna, I would later learn, and she was smiling. It was a practiced smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, which remained scanning the hallway behind me as if looking for something. "Hi, Dad," she said. Her voice was thin, wavering slightly. It's been a long time. I should have closed the door. I should have told her that the miser was busy. But I am a father. And despite the logic that screamed in my brain, the biological imperative to care for my child overrode my survival instincts. I stepped back and let her in. That first visit was excruciating. We sat in the living room, eating the lasagna, which was cold in the middle, making small talk that felt like walking through a minefield. She told me she had changed. She told me she had found a new community that had helped her let go of her material attachments and focus on spiritual abundance. She said she was worried about me. She said the house felt heavy, stagnant, and filled with blocked energy. "I have friends, Dad," she said, leaning forward, her hand resting on my knee. Her palm was damp. "They're part of a group called the Harmony Collective. They're lifestyle consultants and spiritual organizers. They help people like you clear the path." I told them about Mom and how you're living in this shrine. They want to help. I was skeptical. "I don't need help, Sarah. I need quiet." "But look at this place." She gestured vaguely at my pristine living room. "It's a mausoleum. You're drowning in the past. Just let them come for a consultation. Please? For me? It would mean so much to me to do something nice for you after everything." The guilt trip was executed with surgical precision. She knew that my greatest failing was my desire to believe she could be redeemed. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I told her they could come the following Tuesday. I spent the week feeling a gnawing anxiety in my gut. I checked the wall safe in the study 3 times a day. I counted the coins. I wound the watches. I ran my thumb over the velvet pouches. I told myself I was being paranoid. Sarah was my daughter. Surely after 3 years she wouldn't come back just to rob me. Surely she wanted a father, not a victim. On Tuesday morning, Sarah arrived at 10 a.m. sharp. She was not alone. She brought 3 women with her, the so-called Harmony Collective. They were an assault on the senses. They were all women in their late 40s or 50s, dressed in layers of flowing linen and expensive, clunky turquoise jewelry that clacked when they moved. They smelled of patchouli and stale cigarettes masked by peppermint gum. Sarah introduced them. There was Linda, a tall, imposing blonde with eyes like polished glass, who seemed to be the ringleader. There was Janice, a nervous, fluttery woman who kept touching the walls. And there was Brenda, a stout woman with a clipboard who immediately began taking notes on my furniture. "The energy here is very dense," Linda announced without saying hello. She swept into the hallway, her linen pant legs swishing against my hardwood floors. "Very dense. Can you feel the blockage, Sarah?" "I feel it, Linda," Sarah said, nodding solemnly. She looked at me with a pitiful expression. "See, Dad? I told you." They moved through my house with an air of entitlement that made my blood boil. They didn't ask permission to enter rooms. They just flowed into them. Linda picked up a framed photograph of Eleanor. "This holds a lot of grief," she said, placing it face down on the table. "We need to clear this." "Please don't touch that," I said, my voice sharp. Linda smiled at me, a condescending tilt of her head. "Resistance is natural, Charlie. You're holding on to pain. We're here to release it." Sarah steered them toward the study almost immediately. "This is the room I was telling you about," she said. "This is where he spends all his time. The energy here is the heaviest." I followed them into the study. This was my sanctuary. The walls were lined with books. The heavy oak desk sat in the center, and behind it, the large bookcase that hid the safe. Linda walked straight to the bookcase. She didn't look at the books. She ran her hand along the wood, her fingers tracing the molding. She looked at Sarah. I saw a look pass between them, a micro-expression of communication that had nothing to do with spiritualism and everything to do with assessment. It was the look of a butcher eyeing a side of beef. "This is the focal point," Linda said softly. "The blockage is behind here." My stomach dropped. They knew. Sarah had told them. "I think we should start in the living room," I said, trying to shepherd them out. "Nonsense," Linda said. "We start at the source, but first we need to cleanse the atmosphere. Charlie, Sarah tells me you have a kettle? We brought a special blend of herbal tea. It's essential for the ritual. It helps ground the occupants of the home. I can make it, Sarah offered, but Linda stopped her with a hand on her arm. No, Sarah, you need to stay here and help us channel the energy. Charlie must do it. The act of service is part of his release. Dad, please, Sarah said, turning to me. Just go make the tea. It's in the bag in the hallway. It will only take a few minutes. I looked at the four of them standing in my study. I was outnumbered. If I refused, I risked a confrontation that my 72-year-old body was not prepared for. I needed to play along. I needed to see how far they would go. Fine, I said. I will make the tea. I walked out of the study. As I turned the corner into the hallway, I heard the study door click shut. I went to the kitchen. My hands were shaking, not from frailty, but from rage. I filled the kettle. I turned on the gas burner. The hiss of the flame was the only sound in the kitchen. I found the bag of tea they had left. It smelled like dirt and bitter roots. I stood there watching the water boil. It took perhaps 10 minutes. 10 minutes for the water to heat, for me to find the cups, for the tea to steep. In those 10 minutes, I imagined what was happening in the other room. I imagined Linda's manicured hands on my books. I imagined Sarah revealing the secret latch. When the tea was ready, I arranged the cups on a tray. I walked back down the hallway. The house was dead silent. The chatter about energy and flow had ceased completely. I reached the study door. It was locked. Sarah, I called out, rattling the handle. There was a scramble of noise from inside, a thud, a zip, a hushed whisper. Just a second, Dad. Sarah's voice was high, panicked. We're in the middle of a meditation. Open the door, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Another 10 seconds passed. Then the lock clicked. Sarah opened the door a crack, her face flushed, her hair slightly disheveled. Sorry, she breathed. We were just finishing up. I pushed past her. The room looked mostly the same, but the atmosphere had shifted. The air felt charged, electric with guilt. Linda was standing by the window, adjusting a curtain that didn't need adjusting. Brenda was clutching her tote bag tight to her chest. Janice was staring at the floor. The bookcase looked undisturbed. We've done what we can for today, Linda said briskly, stepping around me. She didn't look me in the eye. The energy is very stubborn. We need to let the cleansing settle. We'll have to come back. Yes, Sarah said, grabbing her purse. We should go. We don't want to overwhelm him. But the tea, I said, holding the tray. I made the tea. We can't drink it now, Linda said, already halfway down the hall. It would disrupt the polarity. Goodbye, Charlie. They practically ran to the front door. Sarah lingered for a split second, looking at me with an expression that might have been apology, or perhaps just fear of getting caught. I'll call you, Dad, she said, and then she was gone. The front door slammed. I heard their car engine rev and tires squeal on the pavement. I put the tea tray down on the hallway table. I didn't drink any. I walked back into the study. I locked the door behind me. I went to the bookcase. I reached for the book on the third shelf, the biography of Ulysses S. Grant. I pulled it and the hidden latch clicked. I swung the heavy oak panel open. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The safe was open. It was empty. The velvet pouches containing the gold trade coins were gone. The 3 Civil War-era pocket watches, each worth more than a luxury car, were gone. The small iron box containing the uncut diamonds my great-grandfather had carried across the Atlantic, gone. I stared into the dark void of the empty safe. I felt a physical blow to my chest, a wave of dizziness that forced me to sit down in my leather armchair. It wasn't just the money, it was the history. It was the violation. My own daughter had brought wolves into my den and fed me to them. I sat there for a long time. The afternoon sun began to fade, casting long shadows across the room. I thought about calling the police. I played the scenario out in my mind. Officer, my daughter and her friends stole my gold. Was the safe forced open? No. Did you see them take it? No. Did you invite them in? Yes. It would be a civil matter. It would be my word against 4 of them. They would claim I was senile, that I had misplaced the items, or that the items never existed. Sarah knew I didn't keep insurance records for the collection because of my great-grandfather's paranoia, a trait I had inherited. There was no paper trail. They thought they had committed the perfect crime. They thought I was just a sad, lonely old man who would cry into his pillow and fade away. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of old paper and furniture polish. And then, a shift occurred. The grief receded, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I remembered who I was. I was not just a lonely widower. I was a man who had spent 40 years as a forensic accountant, tracking hidden assets and unraveling financial lies for the state prosecutor's office. I knew how greed worked. I knew how criminals thought. And I knew that criminals who got away with it once always came back for more. I stood up. I walked to the desk and picked up the phone. I didn't dial 911. I dialed Sarah's number. It rang 4 times before she picked up. Hello? Her voice was guarded, breathless. Sarah, I said. I forced my voice to sound light, relieved. I forced a chuckle. Sarah, I have to thank you. There was a pause. What? Your friends, I said. The Harmony Collective. You were right. I walked into the study just now and the air, it feels lighter. I feel lighter. It's like a weight has been lifted. Really? Sarah asked. I could hear the shock in her voice. She was expecting an accusation. She was expecting screaming. Yes, really, I continued, spinning the web. In fact, I've been thinking, if they could do this much good for the study, imagine what they could do for the attic. The attic? Sarah asked. What's in the attic? Oh, just the old trunks, I lied smoothly. You know, where I keep the bearer bonds and the silver bullion? I haven't looked at them in years. The energy up there must be terrible. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. I had them. Silver bullion? Sarah repeated. Her voice had dropped an octave. The breathless spiritual quality was gone, replaced by the sharp metallic tang of avarice. I didn't know you had silver, Dad. Oh, yes, I said, leaning back in my chair, staring at the empty wall safe. Grandfather Silas didn't trust gold entirely. He kept bars of silver. And the bonds, of course. Municipal bonds from the 20s. I've been meaning to get them appraised, but the attic, it's just so cluttered. I don't have the strength to move the trunks anymore. We can help, Sarah said instantly. The collective, we specialize in deep storage clearing. It's often where the deepest trauma is stored. That would be wonderful, I said. Can you come tomorrow? I want to get this energy moving while the momentum is right. Tomorrow works, she said. We'll be there at 9. When I hung up the phone, the trembling in my hands finally stopped. I didn't feel relief, but I felt purpose. A plan is a powerful thing. It gives you a roadmap when your heart is breaking. But before we continue with the preparations for their return, I have a confession to make, a secret that I didn't tell Sarah, and one that I haven't fully explained to you yet. When I opened that safe and saw the empty velvet pouches, my heart broke because of the betrayal, not the financial loss. You see, the items Sarah and her friends stole, the gold trade coins, the intricate Swiss pocket watches, the uncut diamonds, were not real. 10 years ago, after the first time Sarah stole from me, taking a checkbook from my desk to pay for a boyfriend's motorcycle repairs, I realized that my home was not secure. I realized that as I aged, I would become a target. I took the entire collection, the true legacy of Silas, to the bank downtown. I rented the largest safety deposit box they had. But I couldn't bear to look at an empty safe. It felt like admitting defeat. So I used my connections from my days in forensic accounting. I knew people who dealt in theatrical props and high-end replicas for insurance fraud cases. I had duplicates made. The gold coins were lead-plated with a micron-thin layer of gold. The diamonds were high-grade cubic zirconia. The watches were shells, beautifully engraved brass casings with cheap quartz movements inside. The total value of the items they had stolen was perhaps $200. But under the law, the intent is what matters. In the eyes of the law, if you break into a house intending to steal $1 million, but you only steal a ham sandwich, you have still committed burglary. And if you conspire to do it, that is a felony that carries a heavy sentence. They had already committed the crime. Now, I just needed to make sure it stuck. And to do that, I needed to give them a show they would never forget. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I went to work. My first stop was the garage. I found an old, heavy steamer trunk that had belonged to my wife. It was battered and smelled of mothballs. I dragged it into the middle of the garage floor. Next, I needed the bait. I drove to a hardware store 3 towns over so no one would recognize me. I bought 10 pounds of lead fishing weights and several bars of welding metal. I also bought a can of metallic silver spray paint. Back in my garage, with the door closed and the ventilation fan humming, I crafted the bullion. I melted the lead down into rectangular molds I made from scrap wood. When they cooled, I painted them with the silver spray. In the dim light of an attic, they would look convincing enough. They were heavy, cold, and shiny. To a greedy eye, they would look like salvation. For the bonds, I went to my filing cabinet. I had stacks of old paperwork from the 70s, expired warranty deeds, old stock certificates from companies that had gone bankrupt decades ago. I cut paper into the shape of bonds, sandwiching the worthless certificates on top of stacks of plain printer paper. I wrapped them in rubber bands. I filled the trunk with these props. It looked impressive. It looked like a pirate's hoard. I locked the trunk with a heavy padlock, one that was sturdy but could be broken with enough force. I wanted them to work for it. Then came the technology. This was the most crucial part. I went to an electronics store and bought a home security starter kit, the kind with small wireless cameras that connect to a tablet. I didn't want the cheap ones. I wanted high-definition video and crisp audio. I needed to hear every word they said. I spent the rest of the evening in the attic. It was a sweltering, dusty space, filled with insulation and the smell of dry rot. I mounted 3 cameras. One was hidden behind a stack of old magazines, pointed directly at the center of the room. One was mounted high in the rafters, disguised as an old junction box. The third was hidden inside a hollowed-out lamp that sat on a side table. I tested the feed on my tablet. The picture was crystal clear. I could see the dust motes dancing in the air. I could hear the creak of the floorboards. Finally, I dragged the heavy trunk up the narrow stairs. It took everything I had. My back screamed in protest and my knees shook, but I managed to position it right in the center of the room, directly in the crosshairs of all 3 cameras. I sat on the trunk for a moment, catching my breath. It was midnight. The house was silent. I looked around the attic at the remnants of my life. My daughter's old crib, boxes of her school drawings, her first bicycle. I picked up a dusty picture frame. It was a photo of Sarah at age 5, sitting on my shoulders at the beach. She was laughing, her hands gripping my hair, her face full of absolute trust. I wiped a tear from my cheek with a dirty hand. I wasn't doing this to hurt that little girl. That little girl was gone. I was doing this to stop the woman who had killed her. The next morning, the sun rose bright and unforgiving. I was up at 6 a.m. I showered, shaved, and put on a fresh pot of coffee. I dressed in my usual cardigan and slacks. I wanted to look frail. I wanted to look harmless. At 8 a.m., I made the call that would seal their fate. I didn't call 911. I called the local precinct directly and asked for Detective Miller. He was a man I had worked with years ago on a fraud case. He was close to retirement, like me, and he had zero patience for elder abuse. "Charlie," he said, his voice gravelly. "It's been a while. Everything okay?" "No, Dan," I said. "I have a situation. I'm about to be robbed, and the thieves are my daughter and her friends." I explained everything. I told him about the theft the day before. I told him about the bait in the attic. I told him about the cameras. "I need you here, Dan," I said, "but not at the door. I need you to park down the street. I'm going to let them in. I'm going to let them start, and then I'm going to invite you in to watch the show." "We'll be there," Miller said. "2 cars. Silent approach. Charlie, are you sure you want to do this? Once we step in, it's out of your hands. The DA will pick it up." "I'm sure," I said. "I'm done being the victim." At 9 a.m. sharp, a white SUV pulled into my driveway. I watched from the living room window. Sarah got out first. She was wearing work clothes, jeans and a sweatshirt. She looked focused. Linda, Brenda, and Janice piled out after her. They were carrying oversized tote bags, the kind you take to the grocery store, but heavy-duty canvas. They weren't here to cleanse energy. They were here to haul freight. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "Good morning," I chirped, forcing a smile that made my face ache. "You're right on time." "Hi, Dad," Sarah said. She didn't hug me. She stepped past me into the hall, her eyes immediately darting toward the stairs. "We have a tight schedule today, so we should probably get started right away." "The energy feels very turbulent today," Linda added, stepping in. She wasn't smiling, her eyes were hard. "We need to get to the source immediately." "Of course," I said. "The attic is this way." I led them up the stairs. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they would hear it. I felt like a tour guide in hell. We reached the attic door. I pulled the cord and the folding stairs creaked down. "It's a bit steep," I warned. "We can manage," Linda said. She climbed up first, agile as a cat. Sarah followed, then the others. I came up last. The attic was stiflingly hot. The sun beating down on the roof had turned the space into an oven. In the center of the room, the trunk sat like a monolith. Linda saw it immediately. She stopped, and I saw a shiver of pure greed run through her body. She nudged Sarah. "Is that it?" she whispered. "Dad?" Sarah turned to me. "Is this the trunk with the documents?" "That's the one," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Although I seem to have made a mistake. The key, I thought it was on my ring, but it's not." The tension in the room spiked instantly. Linda turned on me, her mask of spiritual benevolence slipping completely. "What do you mean you don't have the key?" "It must be downstairs," I stammered, playing the part of the confused old man. "In the kitchen junk drawer, or maybe in the garage, and I need a crowbar just in case. This heat. I need some water." "Go get it," Sarah said, her voice sharp. "Go find it, Dad. We'll wait here and prepare the space." Okay, I said. "I'll be right back. Take your time." I turned and descended the stairs. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing on the wood. As soon as I reached the ground floor, I didn't go to the kitchen. I didn't go to the garage. I walked to the front door, unlocked it, and opened it wide. 2 police officers were already walking up the path, silent and grim. Detective Miller was with them. He looked at me and nodded. I put a finger to my lips. I led them into the living room. On the coffee table, I had set up the tablet. It was connected to a Bluetooth speaker. "Have a seat, gentlemen," I whispered. "The show is about to start." We gathered around the screen. The feed from the attic was perfect. We could see all 4 women standing around the trunk. As soon as they heard my footsteps fade away downstairs, the transformation was instant and terrifying. On the screen, Linda kicked the trunk. A solid, heavy thud echoed through the speaker. "He's stalling," Linda hissed. "The old fool probably lost the key years ago." "Who cares about the key?" Brenda said. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a heavy screwdriver and a hammer. I came prepared. "Dad said there are bonds in here," Sarah said, her voice trembling with adrenaline. She was kneeling beside the lock, her hands shaking. "And silver. Do you know what silver is trading at? If this thing is full, we're talking 6 figures. Easy." "We split it 40-40-20, Linda said, looming over her. "Wait, why do I get 20? Sarah snapped, looking up. "He's my father. This is my inheritance." "Because you're the liability, Sarah," Linda spat. "You're the one with the connection. If this goes south, you're the one he's going to identify. We're just the hired help. We need a premium for the risk." "Shut up and break it," Sarah screamed, grabbing the hammer from Brenda. On the screen, my daughter raised the hammer. Her face was twisted into a mask of ugliness I had never seen before. She brought the hammer down on the antique lock with a savage grunt. Clang. "Harder," Linda urged. Clang. The hasp gave way. The lock shattered. Sarah threw the lid open. The cameras caught it all. The gasp, the widening of eyes. The way 4 pairs of hands reached into the trunk simultaneously. "Jackpot," Linda breathed. Sarah grabbed a handful of the bonds. She fanned them out. "Look at these! Bearer bonds! Untraceable!" Brenda grabbed one of the painted lead bars. She hefted it. "Jesus, this is heavy. This is real silver, ladies." "Start loading the bags," Linda commanded. "Fast, before the old man comes back with his water." They began to frenzy. They were shoving the worthless paper and the painted lead into their bags, laughing, high on the thrill of the theft. "I can't believe he just left this sitting here," Sarah said, shoving a silver bar into her purse. "He really is losing his mind. He's a useless old miser. He deserves this." Next to me, Detective Miller stiffened. His jaw tightened. "That's admission," he whispered. "Burglary, conspiracy, grand larceny intent." "Wait," I said, watching the screen. "Let them get the bags full. I want them to feel the weight of it." We watched for another minute. They stripped the trunk clean. Their bags were bulging. They stood up, breathless, adjusting their clothes, composing themselves. "Okay," Linda said. "When he comes back up, tell him the trunk was empty. Tell him the energy must have dematerialized the contents. He's so senile he'll believe it." "Got it," Sarah said. She practiced a sad face in the reflection of an old mirror. "Poor Dad." I looked at Detective Miller. "I think it's time." We walked to the bottom of the stairs. I didn't try to be quiet this time. I cleared my throat, a loud, raspy sound that echoed up the stairwell. "Sarah?" I called out. "I couldn't find the key, but I brought some friends who are very good at opening things." Upstairs, the heavy silence that followed my announcement was broken only by the sound of frantic whispering. It was the sound of rats realizing the ship was not just sinking, but on fire. Then came the footsteps. They came down the attic stairs one by one. Linda was first, her face composed into a mask of strained politeness, though I noticed she had abandoned her tote bag at the top of the stairs. Sarah came second. She hadn't left her bag. She was clutching it against her chest, the heavy lead bars inside making her posture slump. She looked pale, her eyes darting around the hallway, trying to assess the threat level without making eye contact with me. Brenda and Janice followed, looking like deer caught in headlights. They reached the landing. Sarah forced a smile. It was a grotesque thing, trembling at the corners. "Dad," she said, her voice high and brittle, "we were just coming down to tell you. The trunk was empty. Can you believe it? All that old paper, but nothing of value. The energy must have shifted." She took a step toward the front door. That was when Detective Miller stepped out from the living room archway, followed by the 2 uniformed officers. The effect was immediate and visceral. It was like watching a marionette have its strings cut. Sarah stopped dead. The color drained from her face so completely she looked like she might faint. Brenda let out a small, strangled yelp, Linda, ever the predator, reacted with fight, not flight. She immediately pointed a manicured finger at Sarah. "Officer, thank God you are here," she said, her voice steady but rapid. "This woman, she brought us here under false pretenses. We were just hired consultants. We didn't know she was planning to rob her father." Sarah whipped her head around, her jaw dropping. "Linda, what are you talking about? It was your idea. You said we needed the capital for the retreat center." And just like that, the Harmony Collective dissolved into a pit of vipers. Detective Miller held up a hand. His voice was calm, deep, and authoritative. "Ladies, that is enough. Put the bags on the floor, now." There was a hesitation. Sarah clutched her bag tighter. She looked at me. For a second I saw the daughter I used to know, the one who would scrape her knee and look to me to fix it. But the eyes were different. They weren't asking for help. They were calculating if she could manipulate me one last time. "Dad," she pleaded, Tell them I'm allowed to be here. Tell them you gave me these things, please. It's all a misunderstanding." I looked at her. I looked at the heavy canvas bag digging into her shoulder. "I didn't give you anything, Sarah," I said softly. "And I certainly didn't give you permission to break a lock with a hammer." One of the uniformed officers stepped forward and gently but firmly took the bag from Sarah's shoulder. The weight of it surprised him. He set it on the floor with a heavy clank. He unzipped it. From where we stood, we could all see the glint of silver paint and the stacks of aged paper. "Grand larceny," Miller said, looking into the bag. "Burglary, conspiracy, and since you ladies were kind enough to discuss the split of the proceeds on tape, we have a nice clean confession to boot." Sarah's legs gave out. She didn't fall, but she sank to her knees, sobbing. It wasn't a cry of remorse. It was the ugly, hacking sob of someone who is terrified of consequences. "I didn't mean it," she blubbered. "I just needed the money. Dad, I owe people. Bad people." I stood over her. I felt a profound sadness, a hollow ache in the center of my chest. But I did not feel the urge to save her. I had saved her 1,000 times before. Every time I saved her, she only learned that there was a safety net. Today, I had removed the net. The officers began to handcuff them. The sound of the ratchets clicking tight was loud in the small hallway. Linda was swearing at the officers, threatening lawsuits. Brenda was hyperventilating. Sarah looked up at me as the officer pulled her to her feet. Her hands were cuffed behind her back. Her face was streaked with mascara. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you set me up? I'm your daughter." I stepped closer. I wanted her to hear this. I wanted this to be the lesson that finally stuck, even if it was too late. "I set you up, Sarah, because you didn't come here to visit your father. You came here to strip a corpse. You looked me in the eye, ate my food, and waited for me to leave the room so you could steal my history." I paused, glancing at the bags of fake loot. "And there is one more thing you need to know," I said. The room went quiet. Even Linda stopped shouting. "The silver in those bags?" I said, pointing to the evidence. "It's lead. I melted fishing weights in the garage last night and painted them. And the bonds? They are photocopies and expired scraps I dug out of the recycling." Sarah blinked, confused. "But yesterday, the gold coins, the watches. We took them to a pawn shop. The guy said they were worth a fortune." I shook my head. "You took them to a fence, Sarah. A criminal. He lied to you because he knew you were desperate. The coins in the safe were lead-plated with gold. The watches were quartz replicas I bought for $20 each. The diamonds were glass." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You are going to prison, Sarah. You are going to prison for grand larceny and burglary. But the joke is on you. You destroyed your life. You betrayed your father, and you lost your freedom. For absolutely nothing. You stole costume jewelry and fishing weights." The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The sheer stupidity of her crime, the utter futility of her betrayal, crashed down on her. Her face twisted from sorrow into pure, unadulterated rage. "You old bastard!" she screamed, lunging at me. The officer held her back easily. "You tricked us! That's entrapment! I'll sue you! I'll take the house!" "Take her away," Miller said, his voice disgusted. They dragged them out. Sarah was screaming the whole way down the path. I stood in the doorway and watched them get shoved into the back of the police cruisers. The neighbors were watching from their windows. I didn't care. When the cars drove away, the silence rushed back into the house. It was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't the silence of waiting. It was the silence of finality. Miller stayed behind for a moment. He put a hand on my shoulder. "You okay, Charlie?" he asked. I looked at the empty driveway. "No, Dan. I'm not. But I will be." The legal process was swift. Because of the video and audio evidence, there was very little wiggle room for a defense. They tried to argue entrapment, but the law is clear. I provided the opportunity, but I did not force them to commit the crime. The intent was entirely theirs. They had broken into a locked trunk. They had conspired to steal. Interestingly, because they believed the items were real, and because they had discussed the value being over a certain threshold, the prosecutor pushed for the full charges. The fact that the goods were fake was irrelevant to their intent. Sarah is currently serving a 5-year sentence. I have not visited her. I do not answer her letters. They are mostly requests for money for the commissary anyway. A week after the arrest, I went to the bank downtown. I sat in a private viewing room with my safety deposit box. I opened it and took out the real collection. I held the heavy gold trade coins in my hand. I listened to the rhythmic ticking of the authentic Swiss pocket watches. I looked at the fire in the uncut diamonds. They were beautiful. They were valuable. But as I sat there, I realized they were just things. They were cold, hard metal and stone. They couldn't love me. They couldn't betray me. They were indifferent to my existence. I put them back in the box. I didn't take them home. My home is no longer a museum. It is just a house. I hired a cleaning crew, a real one, not a spiritual collective, to clear out the attic. I donated the old furniture. I painted the walls a brighter color. I started volunteering at the local library, helping kids with their reading. I needed to be around people who were just starting their lives, untainted by greed. I also updated my will. The Historical Preservation Society that maintains the Civil War battlefields will receive the collection upon my death. They will care for the history better than my family ever could. It is a terrible thing to cut your own child out of your life. It feels like amputating a limb. You know it is necessary to stop the rot from spreading to your heart, but you never stop feeling the phantom pain of where they used to be. My name is Charlie. I am a father who is robbed by his daughter, and I am the man who sent her to prison. Some people in town whisper that I was too hard on her. They say family is family no matter what. But those people have never looked into the eyes of their own child and seen a predator looking back. I sleep soundly now. The ghosts are gone, and for the first time in years, the house is truly clean. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this narration, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And I have one final question for you. Do you think I was too harsh? Should I have given her another chance, or did she get exactly what she deserved? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales like this, hit subscribe.